Welcome to another edition of News in Depth, where we unpack some of the most topical issues of the day. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee. A new poll has shaken Poland's political right. Grzegorz Braun's Confederation of the Polish Crown has overtaken the main Confederation party, pushing Leszek and Menson off the podium. The shift raises questions about the future coalitions with the right-wing Law and Justice Party and deepens internal divides on the right. Joining us today on TVP World to unpack the implication is Leszek Jażdżewski, editor-in-chief of LIBERTÉ magazine, a leading voice on democracy and civil society. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Can you help us understand what's the recent surge of support in Grzegorz Braun's Confederation of the Polish Crown Party? Kind of help us unpack this surge.
Well, I think first of all, I don't know if every one of people who are watching this understand what sort of party Grzegorz Braun Confederation of Polish Crown is. It's basically anti-Semitic pro-Russian party, and with led by the charismatic leader. And I think the person of Mr. Braun is one of the answers. I don't say it's the only answer, but he seems to be, if you want to show the middle finger to Jarosław Kaczyński and Donald Tusk at the same time, and the political mainstream, you vote for them. And I think they can really define themselves as being anti-establishments, assigned to mainstream parties. And I think that's why one of the reasons the surge is the recent surge in the polls is materializing.
Like you mentioned, this party is actually seen as quite anti-Semitic and also has a lot of very extremist views. So why do you think that this is the party that people who are looking for any anti-establishment rhetoric kind of gravitate towards instead of other smaller third parties?
Well, first of all, I mean, if you're on the right, then you basically have lots of choice. You have right-wing Law and Justice, you have the traditional Confederation, which is slightly more libertarian, but you also have this I would say very fringe party, which is Grzegorz Braun party. But at the same time, I think they have a lot of credibility, surprisingly, because they were always opposing like Ukraine, the support for Ukraine. They were very anti-COVID. I mean, against any limitations of movement. I think they gained the traction at the time of COVID. So I think in some way the main Confederacja, the party of Menson and Leszek, has been seen already as a sort of party which can be a part of the larger right-wing coalition. They've been in the parliament for quite some time. So if you're looking for something new, you might not necessarily be anti-Semitic yourself, but you're looking for someone who is really against the established views. And this is what Confederacja of Polish Crown is offering. So, I wonder what would be the future if they are considered, for example, as a part of the wider right-wing coalition that might rule Poland in the future.
Right, that actually brings up a very good point. I'm wondering how significant is this shift for the broader Polish right, be it ideologically or electorally?
I mean, we also have to understand that this is simply just one poll, and we will have to see if this is like the longer term prediction, or if this support is going to stay. Because I think a lot of people were betting their money that after the presidential elections, when Grzegorz Braun is basically gone from the mainstream media, it is not going to be sustainable. Mm-hmm. Well, if it is going to continue, I see that I think there is very little chance that this party is going to be in power. But what is happening, it is radicalizing the mainstream right-wing parties, because especially Jarosław Kaczyński, it is the main threat to him, because a lot of voters are the people who are like elderly voters living in a smaller, small towns or in the countryside, very religious, which is not, for example, a case for the Confederacja, the main Confederacja party. So he has to make a decision whether he's going to radicalize himself, his party, to fight for those voters, or whether he thinks that he has to take a fight more in the center with Donald Tusk. So he has basically fighting a war on two fronts, and whatever decision he's going to make is going to be deciding the future of right-wing here in Poland.
Right. Even in the past few election cycles, we've already seen this pattern where the Confederation Party is essentially what they describe as the kingmaker of elections, where even though they occupy a smaller portion of the votes, it is enough to push the more conservative party over the edge. So it does mean like an alignment between these parties had to be made somehow. So do you think that the radicalization or the rise of Braun's party would mean that eventually the more traditional conservative party will have to give some grounds to these smaller fringe parties?
So, I think we have to take a step back and look what's really the presidential elections meant for Poland. And I think a lot of people interpreted this at the time as another victory for Jarosław Kaczyński. But I think it was a wrong interpretation. I think it was basically the victory of the right wing and also radical right wing rhetoric. And the candidate was sort of like a radical nationalist, dressed up as the candidate of the one mainstream party, which enabled him to get the support of Grzegorz Braun voters, Manson voters, and obviously Law and Justice voters. What's happening right now, it is that we see that this trend continues. So there is not like a one right-wing party. People thought we have two, now we have three. And the coalition made of three parties is going to be extremely difficult. And also considering that Confederacja of Grzegorz Braun won't be accepted by Law and Justice leader currently as a partner. They can try to seek his voters, they can try to convince his MPs to change sides, and obviously if he's going to have like 30, 40 MPs, which seems unbelievable, but if he's going to continue with this trend, he might well have this amount of that many people in the parliament. So he is not going to be able to control them all. Some of them might be completely, even more radical than he is, but some of them might be trying to be shot and convinced to join the Law and Justice and traditional Confederacja government. But even a two-party government coalition would be extremely hard for Kaczyński, but he has a president. So, I think there's going to be a battle on the right to marginalize those parties by Kaczyński, but I think with trends like this, he won't be able to do it. And the question is whether this battle at some point is not going to antagonize them to the extent that this coalition will be even more difficult. It's a very tough choice for him.
It is. So do you think the Braun's kind of rise to stardom is more impactful to the right or to the left? Is it a more ideological shift as a whole of the Polish population to rightwards, or is it just a small fragmentation of the right wing where the ones in the center become a little bit more extremes?
So I think what's happening with Braun is that he obviously has an impact for the whole political scene. I think it can have a sort of a mobilizing impact on the left wing and the liberal, let's say, center sides, because they'll have a perfect enemy. He is a perfect enemy. He is anti-EU, he is anti-Jewish, he is anti-Ukrainian, he is pro-Russian, so he is a perfect enemy. And just to make this suggestion that he can create a coalition with Law and Justice means that also you can, by association, criticize Law and Justice. So he is a perfect enemy for the center. As for the right, we already discussed that, but for the whole political system, that means that they're basically the very marginal fringe views becoming more and more mainstream. So that's really, it makes an impression that the whole political scene is getting more and more radicalized. And there is basically no rules that you need to abide by. And I think in the long term, it's quite dangerous, because before we're able to, not to give a platform to people like this. Now you are unable to silence those voices down. And those voices, well, in my personal opinion, not necessarily should be heard. Some of those voices are inspired by Putin, and they're basically dangerous for Polish future and for Polish security as it is.
Sure, but with the age of the internet, it's like the Pandora's box essentially has already been opened, right? Everyone can kind of have their opinion and voices heard and amplified as well. And it does seem like they're very good at using social media to get their messages across. I'm more curious about whether or not you see this as a more global phenomenon, or maybe just continental phenomenon, where we're also seeing more extreme right-wing parties on the rise in various different countries. Or is this a slightly different case than other countries like Germany?
Honestly, I do think it is that different, because when you think about it, it's almost curious that you didn't have a party which would be anti-EU and pro-Russia in Poland. Obviously, that geopolitics maybe explain why it hasn't happened for quite some time. But if you look at the MAGA movement, you would say that Grzegorz Braun could be perfectly a part of it, right? There is nothing that would differentiate him from, I think, a lot of voices on the American right. So I think in many aspects, Poland is actually more similar to the United States than it is to continental Europe. But yes, also on the continent, we do have those right-wing parties, which might be aligned with Grzegorz Braun in the long term. Yes, I think it's a global phenomenon. I think you're right that basically the fact that you don't have those gatekeepers present makes those parties able to spread. Also, they have big allies on the big tech, on the like Elon Musk and the others. The algorithm is, I think, this is what really helps them. There is no way to contain them in a traditional way. But perhaps you need to fight them. Perhaps you need to confront them. Perhaps you need to prove to the voters that they are wrong and not right. And that's something very new for political mainstream as well. They have to learn how to coexist with the parties like that.
Right. Now, going back to how you describe them as, well, a lot of their supporters as not necessarily on the same page with, be it anti-Semitism or extreme right, but as seeing it as a middle finger to the pre-existing establishment. Do you think that there's any way to revert that trend, be it having a different party that also presents itself as anti-establishment but not on the radical side? Or do you think the more mainstream political party will be able to kind of bring this anti-establishment sentiment down?
So I don't think that it's going to be very easy for any existing party to slur those voters. Obviously, if Braun trend continues and he has a huge support in the elections, there's going to be very hard to make an argument for tactical voting, right? Because obviously, if he's going to be around 5% threshold, which is the threshold which allows parties to enter parliament, that will be able, like either traditional Confederation or PiS can make an argument, okay, you don't waste your vote for Grzegorz Braun, who might not be in the parliament, you vote for mainstream parties. If he's going to be around 10%, that's argument is just impossible. Mm-hmm. Another way to do it is the basic polarization. So I think this is what Kaczynski surprisingly might be willing to try, is that to polarize either you're pro-Tusk or you're anti-Tusk. If you are pro-Tusk, that means you are weakening law and justice. We are the only party that can actually win this and rule. You don't want to support parties that would make unable a right-wing coalition, because we will never make a coalition with people like that. For some people, it might be an argument, but there will be some people who would say, okay, we are tired of those parties. We want something new. And I can imagine the scenario in which there is a completely new party, which might be, not necessarily a radical right, it could be even a radical left, but it's just going to be so very anti the mainstream parties that people will say, okay, they offer some new emotions. But can you try to outbid Grzegorz Braun in his right-wing, anti-Semitic and other conspiracy theories? I doubt it. I'm quite sure that the existing parties will have a huge problem in achieving that.
Right. Some people are also arguing that the current political situation in Poland, where we have a president and prime minister hailing from different party and pretty much reluctant to work together, is one of the reasons that causes this strong anti-establishment sentiment that both parties are not really getting anything done. Do you think that there are some validity behind it, where these parties are the reason that contributes to this anti-establishment sentiment?
Honestly, I really doubt it that people who are voting for Braun, they want to have something done. They know they're voting for him because he's not one of those parties, and I think they want to express their anger, but I don't really think they are counting on the fact that he is going to be part of government. What I think is true in the statement is that people are just tired of two parties like fighting each other, and it seems almost like everything is about them. It's not about us, it's about them. And this is basically also, you can see that on the sides of the currently ruling coalition, that all the smaller parties are losing the support. You only have like one party now, the Tusk party, Civic Platform. So I think there is something happening. You can see the trend that on one hand people still support the big main parties, but you have more and more smaller actors also on the right showing up, and that might be an interesting trend to watch, especially if something happens with the war in Ukraine. That's going to open up all different possibilities, and since I think new actors might emerge before 2027. I'm quite sure that there's going to be new actors before 2027.
Right, and speaking of the Tusk government, I actually have a soundbite here from the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, kind of describing the current cohabitation government and how it's been going so far. Let's take a look, and I would like to pick your brains on it.
President Nawrocki and his people essentially refuse to cooperate when it comes to foreign policy, and not only on issues surrounding the G20. Almost every day I see attempts to undermine the authority of the Polish government and Poland itself by someone from President Nawrocki's circles, and these efforts do not really serve the interests of the country. I really try to have a close relationship with the president on foreign policy, and that's easily verifiable, but there's been basically no response for weeks.
So do you think that the lack of response has something to do with the potentially, like you mentioned, the polarization strategy that paints Donald Tusk as a figure to decide whether or not the voters want to vote for the Law and Justice Party over Braun's Confederation? Or is there something else at play here?
I do think that Nawrocki, having this fresh mandate as a newly elected president, he wants to be a show of force. Basically, that was his main message, is that he is a strong man. But he was elected president, and in Poland, it's the prime minister that rules. What Nawrocki is trying to achieve, he's trying to sort of blackmail Tusk and prime minister and the whole coalition into, okay, you don't have to constitutionally do it. You don't have to consult anything with me if you don't want it. But if you don't do it, I'm just going to veto everything, including stuff that makes actually sense, even for my voters and myself. And he's been using these tactics from very early on. And I think none of the presidents at this stage vetoed that many laws as Nawrocki did. I do think that it might backfire, because people wanted Nawrocki to achieve something, but not necessarily to block everything that government was supposed to do. And it is not the presidential role. We are not used to have this sort of president in Poland. So I think he's risking a lot to do it. Of course, he's very early on in his mandate. So he has still like 4.5 years to change the course and think about re-election. But he is presenting himself as a very partisan, very right-wing partisan president. And I don't really think that majority of voters is going to like it. It's a question who is going to blink first. Mm-hmm. But knowing Tusk for some time, I do believe that he has a stamina and patience, and also he knows how to do political maneuvers to try to outmaneuver Nawrocki and get him to actually accept the reality that this is the government that rules, and the presidents can cooperate or not, but he's not able to make any decision and put them into practice or law.
Right. So, like, politically or electorally, what does it mean? What does that backfire mean? Do we see more right-wing people that is originally voted for Nawrocki going to the Braun side, or do you think that's something that would mobilize the left-wing voters to come out to vote against the Law and Justice Party?
So you see that even though that government cannot achieve that much in terms of passing the law, the fact that they are every day or every week, they are coming up with something new, and they are throwing this at Nawrocki. Nawrocki is mostly rejecting it. But that means you finally have this mobilization that you lacked in the campaign. I think they waited too long. They just thought they're going to have their own president. So now that you have this confrontation with Nawrocki, but at the same time, you have this right-wing voters who voted for Nawrocki before, not because he was such a great law and justice candidate, because they saw him as a person on the right. And I think for some of those people, they might see that, for example, him blocking the officers of internal security forces from getting the sort of upgrades, right, and basically blocking everything, means that they are not. The fact that they voted for Nawrocki doesn't mean they're in his corner forever. That doesn't make them law and justice voters. So they will say, okay, this is not what we wanted. They're not going to change sides and vote for the left, but they might be looking for alternatives. So Nawrocki, for example, the fact that he's not celebrating Hanukkah, which was always the case in the last 15 years by Polish presidents, and having this shooting in Australia, that will make a great case to say, okay, we want to celebrate this, it's a part of our heritage as well here in Poland, the Jewish community. He's not doing this. He's basically a right-wing nationalist. And it's the 50% of people who, of Polish population who voted for him are not necessarily sharing those views. I think he's making the case for treating him as a sort of president who represents maybe 30% of population, and you need 50% of voters. So I think long term he will have to change, but he has 4.5 years to run. So it's been maybe 2-3 years time before we see that.
All right. Thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it, and thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you for tuning into this edition of News in Depth. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.